Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to the people who are joining us from Europe and North America. So welcome to all of those people. Folks, firstly, I hope you are well. I hope you are safe and healthy, because in times like these, that is our biggest blessing. That is what we need to do to make sure that we are actually well engaged with that. We are at the moment struggling from three pandemics. A pandemic of the virus itself invading our body, but we have a pandemic of loneliness and fear, which is invading our emotions. And beyond that, a pandemic of hyperinformation, too much information, being overwhelmed by information, and disinformation. I think we need to be able to address all of those pandemics, and it becomes quite a challenge as we go forward. Beyond that, I think one of the key things, one of the key anchors for me has always been the anchor of trust. And trust to me is one of the invisible glue that's going to put everybody together. And with that trust comes what I call social capital and social goodwill. And those countries, and I'm sure Rohit is going to talk a lot about that today, those countries who managed to build that social trust, goodwill, connectivity, networking, sense of belonging, those are the countries most likely to succeed in the various scenarios that he will discuss. The next very important area is the issue of collective intelligence, where people are collaborating and working together, and collective consciousness, where the whole world is coming together, working and fighting one solitary enemy. And that, to me, is the key. And I think this, to me, is one of the most important things as we go forward. So I think the idea here is to ensure that we are engaging with this particular pandemic as we move forward. So in this process, we have invited some of our best speakers and friends around the world, and we're starting with Rohit. We follow up with Mark Esposito and Emily Sidney Smith, Jerome Glenn, Rob Capello. So those are the 4, 5, 6 people coming in over the next couple of months, and you will be fascinated with some of their insights and some of the research that they have been doing more recently. Now, moving forward to our guest today, a global speaker, a globally recognized best-selling author. He's a publisher. He's a prolific writer. I've been reading some of his blogs and so on, amazing, amazing stuff. He's an advisor to governments and to companies. He is ensuring that we are well looked after in terms of knowledge as far as this new environment is concerned. He is very humanitarian in his approach. He's looked at education, learning, and looking at sustainable development goals. And I think those are some of the issues that we will be addressing today. So without further ado, Rohit, really, really thank you, big thank you, welcome for you to be here with us, and look forward to the conversation today. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Tariq, and it's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate being the opening speaker in this new series. So let me get some slides up on the screen so we can talk through some ideas. So what I'm going to do is really talk about this notion of how do we rethink and rebuild our path to the future in the wake of what's been happening, and also with what's to come in the coming years. And I'm going to draw extensively on our new book. We pulled together future thinkers from around the world to contribute their ideas, and in the space of 10 weeks, we published the book. We had 115 submissions. We took the very best of them and split them into two. The first book, which you see on screen, was published on June 1st, and we'll be bringing out a second one in September. So let me share some of the ideas that sit within that. And I think the first is that now more than ever, we're beginning to understand the value of thinking about the future in discrete chunks. And right now, there's a very clear focus, whether you're an individual, a government, or a business, around the next 12 months. How do we make sure we are redesigning what we're doing to create viable resilience for the foreseeable near-term future? Secondly, there's a growing recognition that with so much changing, with so much uncertainty, we need new platforms, new products, new services, new ways of delivering services if we're a government, new responsibilities, but underpinning all of that, new capabilities. And that's all about what are we going to do in the next 1 to 3 years to make sure we're adapting to be sustainable for the long term. And then the third element is around the sort of 4 to 10 year horizon, where we're saying we can't yet deal with what we see coming, but we know it's going to lead to new operating models, new operating systems, and we need to understand those drivers and create some scenarios for that emerging future in order to then come back and say, what do we need to do in the next 3 years to make sure we're ready for the future? We're agile, we're forward thinking, we're flexible enough to respond to whatever scenario might play out. And what we know is that if we look around us, there are many, many driving forces coming together and battering us at the same time and shaping incredible uncertainty and a range of possible outcomes. So scenario planning is one of the tools that we as trained futurists use to help people make sense of the future, to rehearse the possibilities, and then bring that back to the present to say, well, okay, what should we do to prepare for these different scenarios? And in particular, for the worst case scenario, which is the one that none of us like looking at. And so we're using this model of driving force scenarios. We've deliberately chosen to go very narrow and just think about the next 2 to 3 years for these particular scenarios, just to get the thinking going. And we saw 2 key drivers, which we saw as being the most important and the most uncertain. The first is what happens to the pandemic itself, and the second is the nature of the economic recovery globally. And then those 4 quadrants give us 4 different scenarios. And I'm going to talk you through these 4 in the coming slides. So the first is what we call the long goodbye. This is where we really don't get the pandemic under control, and we see that going on around the world. This recognition that whilst any country is at risk, we're all at risk. So while some countries have contained it well, as soon as they open their borders, the pandemic comes back. We've seen that in New Zealand, in Iceland, and various other places. And so we know that until we don't have it eradicated, we have a problem. And in this scenario, we don't. And we don't do enough to coordinate the global recovery. So this stretches out into 2022, 2023. And what that means is we end up with a deep global downturn. We have little attempts to come back, but every time what we find is the pandemic forces local lockdowns. The businesses that thought they could survive a pandemic end up not. And the big sectors that are really important for many of the economies that are on this call, travel and tourism, hospitality, the events industry, they really struggle to get going with anything other than local business because of quarantine rules or border controls. And that leads to reduced budgets. Those reduced budgets feed into the reduced budgets across the supply chain and knock on into next year and beyond. So that we end up with this very painful and long downturn before we start to see any kind of shoots of real recovery in 2022, 2023. As I say, this is the scenario that people don't like thinking about, but it's the one which we think if you prepare for, then you're prepared for almost anything. The second is the scenario where we get our act together slightly better, we get a vaccine much more quickly into 2021, and we effectively eradicate the pandemic, but we trade the economy for that. We just accept that the lockdowns last longer. We're not going to try and push too hard to keep things open. And we accept that it will take a while to get out, maybe end of 2021, early 2022. But when we pull out, it feels like we're a little bit more robust because we can rely on the fact that we're not going to shut down again. The third scenario is one that many people think their country is in right now, where we just accept that we have to get on with it because we don't want to shut the economy down. And the pandemic continues. We end up putting physical distancing in place. So the parts of each country that have higher infection rates end up being quarantined and distanced from the wealth creators, the people going back into business and from the young in particular. And we try to get things going. We still have quite an erratic rebound because you have variable infection rates around the world. Global trade can't open up as easily. Global travel can't open up as easily. But there is this very strong attempt to keep the economy moving. And then the final one is the one that's, if you like, the path to a more inclusive abundance, where we coordinate globally in the same way as we did for the global financial crisis, the G7, the G20, the UN agencies, the OECD, the EU, the GCC states, the OAU states, the ASEAN countries, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all of the players come together to say we have to fix this globally. And we put a lot of effort on improving the health systems of the poorest countries with the most failing systems to enable them to eradicate the pandemic and roll out the vaccine over 2021 and 2022. On the upside, the economic recovery is really focused on creating growth platforms for the future. So this is giving bailouts to businesses, but tying it to innovation and job creation and the greening of their operations. Big investment in Green New Deal projects, big investment in reskilling the workforce, not for the jobs of the past, but for the jobs of the future. The Sustainable Development Goals are prominent in the thinking in this scenario, but it isn't perfect, and we haven't solved every problem. But by 2022, we really feel like we have a vibrant recovery underway, the pandemic really getting under control, and we're moving forward with some degree of confidence. Now, what those scenarios tell us is that most of us weren't prepared for this, whether it was businesses or governments or individuals. Most of us weren't as well prepared as we could be, and now preparedness is becoming the new mantra. How do we make sure we don't get fooled again, in the words of the WHO? How do we make sure we have better systems, better coordination, better planning, better risk assessment, horizon scanning, scenario planning, contingency planning? And we're really well organized for a range of possible risks. We've just seen a 1 in 100 year event. We're now open to thinking about more of these. And core to the agenda, I think, now is learning. Whether, again, it's individuals, governments, or businesses, realizing that the way we navigate through this is by learning new skills, learning new ways of doing things, learning how to experiment quickly, and learning our way into the new solutions that are starting to emerge and the new possibilities that are starting to emerge, because it's not all doom and gloom. You know, while some sectors are clearly struggling, others are booming. And a lot of new sectors are going to be coming through in the next couple of years, which will create the new jobs and the new economic opportunities. And we have to make sure that we're all focused on how we tap into those opportunities. For government as well, there is this growing sense that the population, however well off we want, are very nervous. And we all want protection now. We want governments to get involved in the economy more, in job creation, in protecting business, in ensuring health, in protecting mental well-being, in it, making sure the education system is fit for the future, and making sure that we have the right civil society infrastructure from transport through to healthcare. And so there's a real challenge for governments to up their game as well, to make sure that they're moving at speed to develop their resilience for the future. For all of us, there is this challenge now that this is just one issue that we face, one global risk around health, but there are many others that could be just as damaging. And so there's this growing sense that all of us need to be thinking about how do we make sure that whatever we do, we're also making progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Clearly, one of the big enablers of this is going to be the rise in all these exponential fields of science and technology that are moving in an incredible place and creating the trillion-dollar industries of the future. And this is really important from a national economic perspective, but also a business perspective, because one of the things we're seeing already is that countries are saying, actually, we want to localize more production and have more small footprint production so that we're not in the same kind of risk situation as we were during the pandemic, where our supply chains were shut down. How do we use these new technologies to enable us to manufacture whatever we need at the scale we need locally? And there's solutions coming through from 3D printing to all sorts of techniques. At the same time, we see manufacturers actually looking to reduce their global footprint of their supply chains. It was already reducing by about 50 kilometers a year on average for businesses. And now there's this move towards saying, well, actually, rather than manufacturing everywhere in the world, let me build up innovation chains where I can sell my IP to players around the world, partner with them to create the local manufacturing solutions, but not take on the same risks as I had before. And let me focus much more on managing my IP portfolio and leveraging that out to the marketplace. So exponential science and technology is just going to accelerate that and see a massive shift. At the same time, we know that digital is going to dominate even more. The big 5 US tech companies were already the 5 most valuable companies in the world, a number of Chinese companies coming in just behind. And to put it in context, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft last year all crossed the hurdle of being valued at $1 trillion. To put that in context, if you add together Volkswagen, Boeing, Bank of America, Disney, 21st Century Fox, Hilton, and Ford, and then throw in all these other companies just for good measure, you still don't get one apple. That is the scale of the economic power these companies have. And so they're becoming providers to sectors, but they're also becoming competitors in sectors and going for direct entry where they think they can use their technology capability to extract more value from the sector than the existing players. They're also talking about setting up their own economic systems. If you look at what Facebook is trying to do with Libra. And so there's a big shift coming where all of us need to up our game digitally, up our digital literacy, and up our understanding of how to compete in a world where digital is likely to be at the heart of everything, whether we like it or not. Key to that, and perhaps the next big shock that's coming, is artificial intelligence. And we've seen a rapid acceleration during the pandemic from a focus on robotic process automation of current tasks to much bigger conversations about how quickly can we get to artificial general intelligence, which is as smart as humans in every domain, to artificial superintelligence that's smarter than us, which would then create the singularity where we could network our brains and all sorts of new possibilities emerge. And now if we're a business or a government or an individual, it is absolutely beholden on us, whatever size we are, whatever our turnover is, to understand the basics of AI and how fast it's moving. Ignorance is no longer a defense. You can go to the University of Helsinki's Elements of AI program, which is a 6-module free tutorial on AI. And we encourage everyone we work with and talk to and meet to just go there, learn the stuff, and then you won't ask as many stupid questions about AI or say dumb things in a meeting, which I hear so often where people say that things can't be done with AI, which are already happening. And watch this space, because we're going to be doing a lot around raising literacy on that. And then what we see is 7 key tactics coming out of all this to really unlock the future. The first is we need to prioritize those pain points, particularly in business. We know what hampers progress. And for almost every business we meet, when we do our strategic workshops with them, the same 3 issues come out by 11 o'clock. We're genetically incapable of prioritizing. We haven't got our technology under control. It won't do what we want, and we don't have the right skills. All 3 are tackleable. We can focus in on the vital few because our staff prioritize whether or not we do. So we can focus on what really counts at any one point. We can start making those tough decisions about what we're going to do with our tech, putting it onto the cloud, centralizing our data, and really giving ourselves a power tool, because the investment we've been making in tech hasn't necessarily paid off. And there's lots of figures from the OECD and others that talk about the decline in productivity. And then the investment in human capability. Shame on any business that isn't putting that as their first priority to navigate what's coming next. And so that really takes us to the second priority, which is about raising literacy, giving people the ability to create their own futures, and helping people map their own destiny. Because we know we're not going to employ everyone that's with us today. They're going to leave at some point. So how are we encouraging them to not only spot the opportunities, but develop the motivation and surround themselves with the supporters who will encourage them to go after the opportunities, who will ask them what the next step is they're going to take in pursuit of an idea, and then encourage them to take action, to experiment, to learn and keep trying. And I hear incredible stories all the time of people doing this. My favorite still is a 17-year-old kid who didn't want to, finish schooling, didn't want to go out to work because there were no jobs, set up a site about luxury watches, and then went out to watch dealers around the world to say, well, look, your shops aren't open. Why don't you advertise on my website? And suddenly he's got a thriving business from nothing with almost no money. That's really inspiring to me, that we can take ideas, we can take our hobbies and make them happen. So the challenge now is about how we make sure our people are really getting into lifelong learning, open to ideas, and working on 2 sets of skills. What you see on the left-hand side are, if you like, the personal skills that help us navigate, learn how to learn, and control our own destiny. And then the right-hand side are those skills that help us do a better job of whatever we're doing, that help us make sense, help us stand out in a crowd, because we have tools to navigate a problem, to think about what's coming next, and to make sense of uncertainty. We also see an incredible array of new models for learning, which are getting close to free. So if you look at this one, I love, Jolt. It's a business school in Israel and in the UK, where they charge about 1/6 of the average business school. They already have more students than London Business School. The students come and take the courses physically. The lecturers come in from around the world virtually. So if I want to learn about investment banking, someone from a leading investment bank comes in and tells me what's really going on via video, or someone from Google tells me how the algorithms work, and I can really learn from the cutting edge. So lots of new examples like this, and then an incredible array of free education. Whether it's Harvard or any of the other big business schools now and universities, they're offering us free education. You pay for the certificate, but there's no reason now for us not to be acquiring the knowledge that we need. And I see so many businesses now really putting an imperative on the senior leadership and creating almost a competition between management and leaders to see what they're learning, to see what they're sharing, and always be learning something new. And alongside that, we need to be more agile. We know we need to develop more agile mindsets to help us cope with the challenges that are coming. And you see at the bottom of the screen a whole range of things that we can work on to help us build that, from developing the agility and fitness of our brains to eating the right kind of food and getting the right kind of sleep. The third one is we're moving to a culture of contactless and paperless experiences. Offices, workplaces, everywhere we go now, we're having to learn how to create a culture where people don't have as much contact, and designing experiences that way. This is Bangalore Airport on the screen. In 60 days, in January, from spotting the pandemic really rising, they created this entirely contactless journey from curb to cabin in order to reassure everyone in the airport environment. We're all going to have to do that in our environments, and how we create a culture that still keeps people vibrant and connected, I think, is really important here. The fourth, ask a futurist and they're going to tell you this, but really building up that capacity to scan the horizon for what's coming next and develop scenarios so we can think about how might we prepare for a range of possibilities, and what are the things that could come that create opportunities or create shocks. The fifth one is about really building leadership that's fit for the future. And we see three challenges there. Leaders who can deal with the speed and scale of disruption that's coming, leaders who have the capacity to adapt and let go of the old assumptions and ways of working that no longer serve us, and then leadership who understand what the new generations coming through need, and understand how the new businesses coming through and the new models and the digitally centric businesses think, so that we can develop leadership to navigate through that world rather than the world we grew up in. The sixth is this willingness to think the unthinkable and take big risks. And there's very easy ways of doing this. The first is just weekly workouts where we take an idea, what if our business dropped by 50% by the end of the year? What if our 10 major customers left? What if a competitor launched a new product at half the price of ours? Where we take really unthinkable ideas and we bring people together to work out how we would deal with it. We get an incredible outpouring of ideas from those. And the other is a willingness to experiment rapidly with these ideas in order to move them forward. And the final thing for business, I think, is around reimagining the actual business of business. I think in the next year, more and more of us are going to be challenged to question not only what does our business do, but what is its purpose? Why are we here? Who are we here to serve? What's our social responsibility? What's our responsibility to our people? As we start to use more AI, what does that mean to the culture of our organization, the vibrancy of our organization? But really rethinking every aspect of our businesses. Right now may not be the time to do it, but it may be the time to start people thinking about this and doing the learning that then feeds into bigger conversations. And then finally, I want to just talk a little bit about government and economic strategies. A lot of governments, particularly in the Middle East, had these incredible plans for what they wanted to do over the next 20 to 30 years. The pandemic has challenged some of that, but I think this is a really good time to reframe those plans and think about how do we rework them in the world we're moving into. And I see three timeframes. The first is the next 2 years. The challenge here is about making sure we come out of this much more robust, that we're building up the capabilities to handle things better, that we're making our supply chains more robust, we're building up the relationships to enable us to bring in a lot more different manufacturers or partnerships with manufacturers so we can do local manufacturing, building up those capabilities and doing the research and development, starting to build research and development capability that lays the foundation for the next 15 years. And then in the 3 to 5 year time frame, those relationships that we were building in the first 2 years, those capabilities we were building will allow us to start building up that local manufacturing infrastructure and that local food supply infrastructure with things like vertical farming. But it's also the time where some of the research and development that we started in the first 2 years can start to come into fruition. And this is also the time when we need to be doing that R&D and capability development for those radical innovations that might form part of the next 6 to 15 years. So whether that's hyperloop transport, whether that's bioengineering of materials, whether that's enhancement of the human brain and body, whether it's any of those exponential technologies we talked about, we need to make sure that we've done the R&D, we've built up the capability in the previous 5 years to really enable us to fly in this period where the entire global economy is going to shift quite dramatically. And the kind of seismic investments being made by countries like China are really going to start to reshape agendas. So for all of us, we need to have those economic development plans. Embedded within that, particularly in the 3 to 5 year timescale, is the reworking of a lot of civil society, our education systems, our health systems, our R&D investment plans, our long-term infrastructure plans. And in order to be doing that in the 3 to 5 year timescale, we need to make sure we're laying the foundations for it in the first 2 years. So I think there's a real opportunity here now to rethink and rework the way we do economic development. All in all, I think all of us are at that stage where it's like taking to the dance floor for the very first time. Most of us had learned some routines that we could cope with when we went on the dance floor, and that's a metaphor for business or government. Whenever something came up, we had some routines that we knew how to get us through, how to not look embarrassed in the situation, how to cope with it. Now we're in a situation where we have a perfect storm of challenges, as Tariq alluded to at the beginning, and we're having to learn some new dance steps. We're going to be awkward. We're going to trip over ourselves. We're going to bruise our knees even maybe sometimes. But this is the time to be doing that, to really be preparing ourselves for a very uncertain future in the hope that we can navigate through it and survive and thrive and come out of this feeling stronger, more vibrant, more inclusive, and more sustainable. So I hope that's made some sense. It's a very rapid run through of just a few of the ideas that are in the book, but I hope it gives you something to think about and some fuel for the conversation to follow.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you very much indeed. There's actually a lot to absorb there. You said it was a rapid process, and I'm glad you did that. You talk about scenario analysis, and in some of our work we do too. You started with going towards your last slide, 2 years, 5 years, and then beyond. We need to get to those 2 years. In other words, we need a 3 to 6 months, sort of like oxygen mask survival. Then we need a 6 to 12 to 18 months, which is really consolidating and building some level of resilience and response to where we are today, and then building long term. Can you throw some light in terms of your experiences? How are companies putting the oxygen mask on? Which are the companies that are struggling the most, like aviation, hospitality, and others, which you've done a lot of work on? And then we go to the 6 to 12 month scenario, which is the most likely thing in front of us in terms of dealing with this. What are your findings on that?
What we're finding is that the very best organizations are actually working 3 different timescales. So they have a group of people in the organization who are dealing with the here and now, and how do we navigate through the next 3 to 6 months? Just constant adaptation, whether it's having people work from home, trying to work out what demand's going to be, trying to second guess what our customers are going to do. But then they have a second group who are saying, okay, what are we then going to do for the next 12 to 18 months? Beyond that, what are we planning now for the way we're going to work, the way we're going to operate, the markets we're going to go after? And then they have a third group who tend to be looking at the longer term, or looking at the more speculative as well, saying, what are the opportunities that come out of this? What are the changes? So even in sectors like aviation, where some have literally had 100% of their flights wiped out, you're still seeing that thinking going on. And it would be unfair to pick individual airlines. There are some that are doing a hopeless job at this. And really, they're still in crisis mode. They literally can't think beyond, what am I going to do today? There are others who have done, I think, a very good job. And some countries, I think, have done a very good job at trying to engineer a way through this. So, for example, I think, Dubai in particular, if you look at it, reopened to international travelers on the 6th of July, had a very clear rule about, have the antigen test either before you leave the departure airport or have it on arrival, but you're not getting into this country unless you've been tested. You've seen Ras Al Khaimah do some really interesting things where they've allowed charter flights in from Russia where everyone's tested before they get on the flight. It's only them on the flight. They go through Ras Al Khaimah airport with only a certain group of staff serving them who've been tested. Their entire journey is then managed, if you like. They're quarantined, they get to the hotel, they stay in the hotel. The staff there are tested regularly. And effectively, they're in quarantine for 14 days, but they're having a holiday, and then they're doing the same on the way back. And so you're seeing clever models like that, where places and companies and organizations are saying, what are those clever things we can do to navigate the short term? And then in the medium term, it is about things like, well, the 6 to 12 month. A lot of it is about how do we restructure the operating model? Are we going to move to a permanent model of only having 25% office space for our workforce? And that at any one time, only 25% will be in. How do we reorganize around that? How do we have people work from home or from local workspaces? And funnily enough, the pandemic has been like a gift to WeWork. Suddenly WeWork is on the brink of turning a profit next year because people want to work locally and they're picking up very cheap local office space. So instead of going into a bank in the center of town, I just go into a local WeWork center and work from there. I don't have the travel time, but I don't have to spend the rest of my life working from my dining table. And so I think we're seeing lots of interesting adaptations, but for me, the real challenge now is to make sure you keep those three horizons in mind rather than just trying to deal with the crisis. Because if you only deal with the crisis, you'll probably only ever deal with crisis. You'll constantly be putting out fires because you haven't done enough thinking about the longer term and how do you restructure for the future.
So anecdotally, when we talk to CEOs, and I've done that quite a lot, we find that if you ask them, are they ready for the next 18 months? Generally, the answer is no. Even though they know that they are going to be hitting the brick wall over the next 12 to 18 months, but they're not prepared at all. What's the mindset shift that we need to do with the CEOs? Because there's a lot of them actually seem paralyzed and very sort of myopic in their thinking.
Well, unfortunately, just before we do that, do we have some polling questions that we can put up?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Would you like me to throw them out now?
Let's get those up while we're talking, and then people can
okay, let's just
too.
do that. The first set of polling questions is about the aftershocks and opportunities, so get you folks working. And there are two scenarios. One of them is, which scenario do you think is most likely in your country? And Rohit has identified those. And the second question is, which scenario are you doing the most preparation for? So I launched this poll. It'll probably take you about a minute to do. Let's get the results and see. Here we go. Here we go. Launched.
And while we're doing that, I'll go back to your question.
Yeah.
Around what are governments doing?
The CEOs are actually. I was thinking their mindset.
CEOs doing, and I think the thing I'm seeing is that it's a gradual thing. Most have been in shock, but now increasingly what we're seeing is people saying, now help us think about how to navigate through this. And not just how do we spot the next pandemic or the next crisis of this kind, but how do we become better attuned at spotting risks? And actually many of the things that we think might be risk will be someone else's opportunity.
Yeah.
So how do we get better at thinking the unthinkable, that kind of thing we talked about? And the weekly workouts now, we take part in these regularly. We just join them for an hour where they're talking about an issue. Quite often we're volunteering the question, or we're bringing up an issue that they just don't want to talk about. It's almost a big undiscussable. What if your competitors came to market with an offering the same as yours at 50% of the price? What would you do? And rather than challenging them and talk about the quality of what came, you add to it and your customers are buying it. So we take away all the argument and we force people to really start to think. And after a while, they get really into thinking that way and starting to think about the future in bite-sized chunks. There's a number of people who do want to think more. They want to take more training in how to do this formally. people actually love the process of scenario planning. So there's a lot of different possibilities of how you can engage people. And now with everyone being at home, theoretically we have a little bit more time because we're traveling less. There is a little bit more time if we wish to give ourselves permission to do it, to do some learning. Come to webinars like this. There's a lot of content now that we can consume to just start to open our mind. One of the things that we ask people to do before we have our sort of deep dive futures workshops is to spend the 2 weeks beforehand just watching between 5 and 15 minutes of videos a day about what's changing in the world. For the first week, we supply examples of 30-second to 3-minute videos. And the second week, you find the teams are sharing what they found. And you get a lot more of that, they get a lot more of that interest then, and because they're generating it themselves. But the conversation changes completely because they're blowing their own minds. They're not just having a guest speaker come in to do it. And that's what I think we have to do. We have to build that muscle up that's willing to explore the future.
Super. So we've got just over 50% of the people responding. So they're either shy or lazy. Either way, that's not good. Anyway, very simple questions. So the long goodbye, there are 28% of the people who voted.
I think you can share the results on screen.
I'm not so sure I know how to.
At the bottom, it says end poll, and then it should say...
I can end poll.
And then it says share results.
Share results, there we go.
There you go. So interesting. The one that most think is the most likely is that...
safe but hungry.
We get the pandemic over. Second to the long goodbye, that is the long goodbye, where I think more and more we're seeing this shift where people are beginning to think this is a long-term issue. And I think particularly the numbers coming out of places like India and the US are scaring people. The most populous country on earth and the biggest economy are both in a very bad state. And interesting that a lot of people are also doing the most preparation now for safe but hungry. And a growing proportion are looking at the long goodbye, which is it's good news.
All right, super. So at least we got some little bits of feedback from our audience. So that's wonderful. So Rohit, let's because there's so much to cover. Let's start trying to go through some rapid fire questions, and then open it up to the audience. Aviation industry, you wrote a blog on how to build safety and trust and so on. It's very relevant for our part of the world. Quick snap answer, what do we do?
The issue with aviation is that it's fine, it's great if one airport does a fantastic job, if Dubai Airport does a great job, but what if the airline flying in doesn't? What if the airport I've come from doesn't? So this is where we need to have that kind of sealed and secure experience where you have a consistent standard of tracking and tracing. My view is that, we ought to be moving to a model where you can't buy your ticket until you've said you've had a test.
Yeah.
And that the airlines themselves and the airports could get into delivering the tests. But you need that consistency of experience all the way through to the hotel. And you need to feel like you're having the same standard of cleanliness, testing, all of those things all the way through. That's how the industry can recover as a whole. Otherwise, you have pockets. And it doesn't matter how good Dubai standards are. If you've got massively rising infection rates around the rest of the world, Dubai will have to do quarantine on arrival or close its borders. And that you don't want.
Okay. So looking at CEOs, one of the things we recommended that they should all become futurists. How does one become a futurist? Both of us are, so we have our own experiences. Should they actually go and do a course? Should they just get some telescopic lens out there? How should they actually start doing that?
I think there's two different levels to this. One is if you want to do futurism as a profession, foresight, then there are a lot of training courses that teach you the tools and techniques so that it goes beyond the populist view that it's just about forecasting and prediction, and that you're learning a whole range of tools to explore the unknown. But for most CEOs, I don't think they have to put themselves through a 1-year, master's program or anything. I think it's more about consuming a range of content and ideas about what's changing and listening, letting go of what worked before. It's much more a mindset change of being open to ideas and then being willing to experiment. Go and look at businesses that look very futuristic to you. Talk to their founders, understand their thinking, understand what they're doing. Get in to see technology companies who are doing incredible things. Do some reading, watch some video every day, and build up that future thinking gene in your head. And then surround yourself with people who are also thinking that way. Insist that your lawyers, your accountants and everyone talk to you about the future and how they see it changing and what they would advise. Make sure your senior leadership teams are taking short courses, having the training in how to do this kind of stuff, for definite.
Super. A big question, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So folks, if you can start putting your questions on the chat so that we can get your views and understand what are the sort of things that you are interested in.
Can I suggest that everyone puts their questions in the Q&A box because it's easier and then people can vote on those?
Okay, we can put it in Q&A.
You're trawling through a lot of nonsense. Well, not nonsense, but a lot of stuff in the chat. And I see there's a lot of comments there. Not nonsense. I take that back completely.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thanks for guiding us through. Okay, big question is, about 70, 80 years ago, the Bretton Woods Convention in 1944 came up with the United Nations and the World Bank and IMF, World Health Organization, and this came out at the end of World War II, and it served us fine for the last 70, 80 years. Do we need a new Bretton Woods Convention? Do we need a new global consciousness thought process to look at the future of health, the future of work, the future of the planet, the future of learning, the future of governance and ethics, and create a new platform? And thought leaders like you, and myself and us, we need to go out there and basically say, folks, this is a new world with a new set of rules and a new set of tools. And the old world is fine, that's your core business, but how do we build this? What are your quick thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one is I get at least 2 emails a day or LinkedIn messages from people who say they're doing that. And can I be part of their process? And within 3 weeks, they've disappeared without trace. But I bless people for trying. I think that we need to start with the agendas of our big global institutions and really make them much more future focused so that they're asking those questions, and then have them come together around the creation of what might be a new Marshall Plan, in the same way as, you know, we had that for Europe to rebuild it post World War II. I think we need that for the planet now. But we need the institutions working together. We need transparency about what the goals are for these things. And then you start to form the different elements of it. We have a great focusing lens in the Sustainable Development Goals. That would be a really good place to start and say, you know, how do we move this forward? There's already a lot going on, but I think you can then convene these groups to talk about these things in a way that's more integrated and very focused on that mix of short term, how do we move the needle, medium term, how do we build the capacity, and long term, how do we transform the story?
I'm a little bit more skeptical than you in terms of institutions, Rohit, because we know that innovation will not come out of institutions. They are too sluggish, they're too slow. It has to be on the edges, it has to be on the adjacencies. The United Nations is not going to change. The UN Sustainable Development Goals have been going on for the last 20 years, and they're still struggling to get there.
I fundamentally disagree. I think they've become a focuser now, and for all the talk of all this great stuff happening at the margins, I see very little evidence of stuff that's really changed the world. If you keep talking about Mohammed Yunus and Grameen Bank, you know, that's a tired example. It's a great one, but it's a tired one. You need the scale of these institutions to roll stuff out. They don't have to do the innovation, but they're a great delivery mechanism if we focus them right. If we stop them being self-serving bureaucracies and basically spending all their time refereeing between their member institutions, and we focus them on getting stuff rolled out and then partner to do the innovative thinking, I think there's a lot that's possible.
Okay, super. So let's go on to the questions. My friend Jafar Aweda, he's a CEO, he runs his own company, and great guy. His question is, he obviously congratulated you on your presentation, and he said, what is your intake into disruptive technology for the consultancy industry? You work as a consultant yourself. Can we have another Uber kind of concept in this domain? Shared resources, bring them all together, and off you go.
there are different parts of what are done under consultancy that can certainly be done in that way. So the huge amounts of data crunching we're seeing being tackled, AI pulling out really interesting facts and salient points, a lot of different tools to do that kind of work. Where I think it's harder to use technology today is because, well, are those areas where you're genuinely doing advisory. You're coming up with ideas and then you're helping sell those to clients and socializing them through the organization and getting organizational buy-in. There's technologies that can help, but there aren't technologies that will completely replace that process. I keep hearing and seeing tech platforms that tell me that they've answered every question needs to be answered in consultancy, but you're getting real cookie cutter solutions and you're not getting genuinely tailored advice. Now, maybe not every consultancy gives genuinely tailored advice, but I think you separate out the two. In the same way as legal, you separate an awful lot of the data interpretation stuff to tech, and then the lawyers are now increasingly doing the added value advisory on top of it.
So the hybrids are really one of the things that will happen in the future between the two. We have Chandra Nagpal who has asked a question. We have quite a large number of organizations who were not pre-COVID and even now not doing Horizon 2 and 3 at all. What's your view on that and why? And what would be an external consultant advisor? What would they do to motivate them to shift focus beyond the here and now?
I have very simple views on this. They don't, because they've never felt the need to. They thought they could rely on what they were doing in Horizon 1 and that somehow they would always make it through. There's a bit of a shock now.
Yeah.
But I genuinely believe that I only have one lifetime. And therefore, I can tell pretty quickly whether clients are willing to go to Horizon 2 or 3. And if they're not, I don't see it as my responsibility to change that. You know, pay someone else who's willing to take your money and you know, walk away with no results. I'm much more interested in the people who want to go there because there's plenty of them. I think for the ones who aren't, the challenge is that they at some point have to give themselves permission to open the door and let the future in the words of Graham Greene. That's not my job. You know, they can come to free seminars like this and webinars like this, which should help, but don't hire me to help you think about the future. Or help you become willing to think about the future. You should be doing that anyway. Hire me or you or anyone else once you're ready for that, because otherwise it's a very expensive game to play.
Yeah. And I think that the mindset shift that we are trying to bring about, that's the most difficult thing, because we are linear thinkers by design almost, and we need to think exponentially. We need to unlearn so many things. There's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done during this COVID crisis, which is something a lot of people are finding very, very painful, which is a follow-on question. How do you overcome mental block and freeze?
So the thing is, you know, none of this stuff is new. Singularity U's been around for 15 years or whatever. You know, futures thinking has been around since the 60s. There have been innovative and radical thinkers, great management thinkers, who've always said pretty much the same thing, which is that you have to let go of some of the past in order to make space for the future. And there have been leaders who've just been unwilling to do that. And eventually, either through shock or opportunity, they change. That basic human behavior hasn't changed. So, you know, my view is, let's stop talking about that group that we can't change. You know, let them go out of business. Let a crisis drive them to the point where they have to do something different. But let's use all this incredible talent and brain power that can help you explore the future to work with the organizations, of which there are plenty, who do want to go there, with the countries who do want to go there. I just get slightly frustrated with this constant conversation about how do you change the mindset, because those same people are the ones who won't let their children make choices about what they do next in their lives, who won't let their partners choose what, you know, what furniture they want. They want to control everything in a way that's comfortable for them. And how they are in one part of their life is how they are in all parts of their lives. You know, that it's their responsibility. If we're paying them the big bucks, it's their responsibility to just start accepting that some of what they're hearing might just be true and going out and learning for themselves. Because my guess is they'll learn more at a cocktail party, talking to one of their friends that's made the shift, or talking to someone who's made big bucks by going there than they ever will from listening to external advisors telling them what's coming or what they should be doing. You know, we've got to be human about this and humble. We can't change everyone, and I'm not that bothered about trying to change the majority of the population that don't want to change. I'd rather work with the ones who do and let the rest follow.
And actually, one of the things that was exposed in the industry and businesses, that their business model was extremely weak. They were not resilient enough to even last 4 to 8 weeks of a shock. And that's poor management. That's, you know, the banks haven't done a great job. They've overlent and so on. The slightest shock happened in the oil industry in the US. Now, a critical question, which links to the question that Robert Coombs has asked, and that is that the business of business, or businesses, the disparity of income between the Amazons of the world and everybody else, the new social structure and society and government and policy and private enterprise coming together, and there's a lot of tension there. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we start working on building a new platform, or thinking at least, to start sharing this? You alluded to that in AI.
Every time you talk about a new platform to people who've got an investment, every time you start talking about, you know, building a new platform to people who are invested in the old one, they very rarely stay with their arms open. they run away. So I think right now, and also the new platforms don't always deliver what they promise. I think this is time to be experimenting, just trying some new things, some different ways of working. So Libra came along. It was this incredible idea that you could have this entire economic ecosystem all trading using their own currency, that you wouldn't need banks, you wouldn't need credit cards, you wouldn't need anything because you could do everything inside Libra. You could earn likes on your Facebook page. And if you earned enough, you earned enough credits that you could put your kid through school, right? So, I mean, incredible thinking, but the vested interest of the banks, the credit card companies, and the governments who really didn't like that all went, yeah, no, thank you. You know, back of the line, we're not even going to approve this. And so you have to also...
But it also came from the wrong company. If it had come from a more trusted organization, perhaps a few people would have looked at it.
I don't think any company proposing that would have got support, because it was too early and there were too many turkeys that would have been asked to vote for an early Christmas. It just wouldn't have gone down well. So I think you have to do experiments. You have to build coalitions of the willing. You have to find countries that are willing to do bolder things. You know, again, the UAE, Dubai in particular, seem much more willing. Singapore seems a bit more willing. Taiwan seems a bit more willing. And you work with the players who are willing to go there. Iceland is willing to do the most incredible things. It has a regular conversation about being a debt-free economy. It can do that because it's got 350,000 people.
Yeah.
You know, you start to work with those who are willing. You do the stuff there, and then you evolve from there. I just don't believe that we can create these grand solutions today that the rest of the world jumps on, unless it's sort of, you know, a commercial platform. And then there's all sorts of drawbacks of being beholden to Google or Facebook or Apple. And we see the pushback on that. So, or Amazon. So I think it's either going to be the kind of Tony Stark type, you know, entrepreneur who says, I'm just going to do this and you follow me. Or it's going to be smaller, interesting collaborations that grow into something bigger and people wanting to do it in alternative ways.
One of the interesting question from Karan came through is, what are some of the contrarian views you have at the moment and why? What are you challenging? What are you pushing back on? You mentioned some of them already, but are there any more stories?
Well, I'm challenging this view that everything will be different. I think if we go forward 2 years and we look back, we'll be unpleasantly surprised by how much has stayed the same. I'm challenging this view that there's a trade-off between fixing the pandemic and fixing the economy. And, you know, this view that, well, if we don't send people straight back to work, the economy will die. Well, actually, we're causing a slow death to our economies by not being harder and more resolute in our lockdowns and clampdowns and trying to really, you know, get rid of it and closing the borders and then subsidizing the airlines and whatever. But I think we need to be much more robust in trying to eradicate and control the pandemic until we get the vaccination. And then I think you have a much more robust economy, and long term it will cost you less. I think we're sowing some very deep economic seeds of destruction at the moment. I think I've talked about digital a lot. I think there'll be a pushback on digital as well. I think people, governments and whoever will be very worried that AI will take over, and we'll have all the wrong kinds of constraints around AI that don't stop any of the really bad stuff happening, but stop a lot of the good stuff that could actually help us solve some problems, because we put a lot of regulation around the things we can regulate, and we don't put any controls on the stuff that's going to blow us away.
Yeah. And we're also looking at the issue of surveillance versus legitimate following in terms of what's happening with the virus itself, in terms of contact tracing and so on. But then that leads to surveillance, and that surveillance leads in the wrong hands. So that goes into the issues of freedom. I think that's a huge issue. Jamil Janjua, who's a mutual friend, so he thanks you for your presentation and us. And he asks a very dangerous but interesting question. What do you think would be the consequences of a good world war during this pandemic? Because can that blow everything up and we restart and it's all control delete and God knows what happens? I'm not doing it seriously, of course, but you know what I'm saying. It's like, is that what's required?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Depending on where you are in the world, there are different rumors about who will start the war and over what. And there's this story going around that will Trump start a war over Kashmir? Backing India but taking on Pakistan, giving himself something that he can win. Yeah. That looks good at home. But do then China pile in? Do the Russians pile in because they just fancy a good chance to get involved and have a go? I don't think we'll go there in the near term, because I think the costs are too high and no one has the stomach for a world war. We saw a really interesting skirmish on the border between India and China.
20 people died, but the world wobbled.
20 Indians died. We don't know how many Chinese died.
Right.
But what's interesting is, in a world where we've invested trillions in all sorts of ballistic weaponry, as I understand it, not a single shot was fired.
Okay.
And you have to ask why. Why were they fighting with cricket bats, with sticks, with sticks wrapped in barbed wire? Why were they throwing rocks at each other with two of the most heavily armed militaries in the world? What was that about? And that's, I think that for me, the underlying message was, look, we are going to have a bit of a fight here because we're just getting on each other's nerves. But we're not going to go to ballistic conflict, because that would escalate out of all control. And no one wants it. And I don't think we'll end up with a world war unless it's to do with, the US trying to influence things in the, the run up to the election. But I think there'll be a lot of pressure not to do that. There's a slight chance, with everyone getting angry with China at the moment, that something could go wrong there, an unexpected development. But I think China's pretty savvy. I think China, of all of the countries on the map, have probably gamed the scenarios way more than anyone else. And I would say they're probably 5 or 6 moves ahead of everyone else in terms of understanding what could happen and how to play it.
Yeah, indeed. We've just crossed the top of the hour, so let's do another 5 minutes or so, Rohit, because the series of questions are just coming straight through. And one of the questions which is quite interesting, and that is that, and I'm sure you and I get this all the time, and that is that, we talk about the future, we get great advice, we all sound very intellectual and cool, but what's the real tangible stuff? What can we do tomorrow morning? How can we get up tomorrow morning and start something new, close something down, not do something, or start doing something fresh and new? And is there a methodology and approach? And I think you mentioned a few, but I think a little checklist would be good.
Well, I think, what I would say is go back and look at the 7 steps I went through, because they're all very much what you can do tomorrow. I'm very worried about people rushing to action, because that's what caused the mess that people struggle to get through. Because most of the time when people are firefighting, they're also pouring petrol and, feeding matches into the story. I think now is a time for really calm reflection, for investment in learning so that we understand what's coming and we're making good choices. Rationalize your priority list. Look at all the projects and initiatives you've got on. Look at the ones that really haven't made much difference or we haven't made progress on. Cull a bunch. Our people can't cope with the stuff we're trying to do right now. Focus on a vital few, get those delivered, learn from them, move on. Take your big digital projects, scale them down into smaller bite-sized pieces because the world's changed, demand has changed, everything's changing, and really get some results out of those. Invest in digital literacy, invest in general literacy of the workforce, really encourage people to take ownership of their learning. Everyone has a to-do list, create a to-stop list. Ask all your employees what they would stop doing tomorrow if they thought no one would notice. The meetings, the reports, the wasted effort, because there's a lot of that. So have an orgy of elimination, just culling the stuff that doesn't count, I would say. And then, just the other 7 steps. And start to do some thinking, watching the videos, doing some horizon scanning, thinking through some scenarios. I think that all of that is what we can do now.
There's a very elegant phrase called quantitative easing, which is effectively short form for printing more and more money. Governments can do it, so they keep printing money. The US has just printed out $9 trillion. And I say many other countries will do exactly the same. Will it just lead to the collapse of the dollar? This is Ali Asghar asking. Or nobody really cares and we'll just kick the can forward?
It depends on the economy. I'm not a macroeconomist in the sense of having a model of how all these things play out. But I think if you're the US, you can quantitative ease, until the end of time. There are the biggest economy. People are always going to buy your debt. You're always going to be able to say, well, we'll pay for this one day, or we'll just expand the money supply through quantitative easing. I think if you're Chad or Togo or Sri Lanka or Estonia, you're going to find it a lot harder to quantitative ease in the same way. And I've chosen deliberately countries of very different economic strength for their size, but it's not a universal tool. It's not like giving everyone Wi-Fi. You can't give every country quantitative easing and hope it works out. So I think, one of the things we talk about in the book is, I think in 10 years' time, we'll see a lot less countries, who are genuinely flying an independent flag. I think what we'll see is more countries becoming protectorates of other countries, looking after them or merging, because we just can't afford to have separate governments in 5 neighboring countries of 1 to 5 million each. Why don't we have one economics department, one education department, one police force? I think you'll start to see more and more of that going on. We will see some of the weakest and most fragile nations just collapse in the next few years. And the bailout package will be tied to some sort of country adoption that then you have a very direct relationship where maybe Canada is managing country X and Estonia is managing country Y, and India's taking on responsibility for looking after country Z and whatever. But you have a very close relationship with your coach and sponsor, if you like, and they really guide you through. So you have less of the friction than you see in in the current models where they're through global institutions. Yeah, I mean, I think some of those things, my big fear is mental health, that we just won't put enough effort into mental health. And we'll see massive declines in that, which leads to domestic violence, crime, all sorts of stress-related illnesses. I worry that could be one of our biggest killer diseases of the coming years.
You use the wonderful metaphor of getting onto the dance floor, learning new dance moves, playing, listening to new music, and just going from classical music to salsa. I mean, it's a completely different way of doing stuff. How do you find your new space? How do you project your voice in that new space? I'm getting towards the end of this session, so I wanted to ask these questions. How can we actually engage that in what's next for us as individuals initially, and then we go into corporates and then governments?
So we know how to find the new space. It's just whether we pay attention to what we're reading and learning. We have this wonderful tool called the internet, which allows us to research sectors, understand where the growth is, understand where the opportunity is, see which of them makes our heart race a little faster because we're attracted to it. Then we can do the learning. The key is to surround ourselves with people who give us encouragement, who, whether we're an individual or a business or a country, you know, surround ourselves with people who will say, oh, that's really interesting. What's the next step in your learning? What are you going to do next? Who keep asking us good questions and encouraging us to take action rather than just talk. And then it is about experimenting. That's how you do it. And how do you find your voice? Well, again, you've got the platforms, but we also have around us, we all have people. And we can talk to those people and ask them to talk about what we do. I mean, how do you and I promote these webinars? We go to all sorts of friends and say, will you share this with your networks? And, you know, we ask people, and I would say probably 25% of the audience comes because someone's introduced it to someone else. That's how you amplify. And if you've got something interesting, if you've got something worth having, people will talk about it. If you're a direct replica of everything else in the market, then you're just a commodity, and then you're going to have to duke it out with everyone else just competing in the same ways. The challenge is learning how to use these tools, whether it's social media, word of mouth, all of those things to get the voice out there. There's clever stuff you can do with PR and stunts and things. I don't want to go there because 95% of the population is not into even thinking about doing that stuff. So let's go for the stuff that we can all do.
My penultimate question is the tension between local and global, whether it's in terms of supply chains are going to come much closer together, micro manufacturing, countries becoming self-resilient, food security. Do you know that, as a very interesting data point, that 275 million people will die, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, by the new year, of starvation because of the pandemic. So forget the 2 million people who die because of the pandemic. There'll be 275 million who die because of starvation. Normally, it would have been about 100 million. So there's a delta of 175 million people because of this thing. So what we need to do is to basically bring food security and all of these elements closer to home. And that will really fundamentally change industries and explode innovation. So my question is, what are those tensions, and how can innovators and entrepreneurs around us take advantage of that and build something around it?
Well, there are lots of ideas out there that are bearing fruit now. So there's already a lot of different things you can do around saltwater agriculture, so that you don't have to have clean water to grow things. They desalinate and then you grow in that. Vertical farming, that's becoming very vibrant, very viable. Even farming in the back of container trucks. You know, this is all doable now. There are solutions now. It just requires entrepreneurs or governments who are willing to bring this stuff in and start experimenting. And then there's all the precision agriculture stuff that just says, how do you use your land better? How do you learn how to grow better? How do you learn where to plant better? So we use the data and we combine some of the sustainable agriculture with precision agriculture, with organic farming, and you start to get much higher yields. So there are a lot of different things we can do to totally transform the food chain within a year in any country. This is not stuff that's going to take 10 years, because this is all proven and available solutions that we can leverage.
I'm an optimist and an idealist, and I want the world to be a better place, whether it's through the Sustainable Development Goals or anything else that we do. What's really close to my heart and what's really important is to actually start thinking in terms of these amazing horizons. And I believe that we live in the world of abundance. We just need to go and find it, create it, and build it. What are your final words of something positive, something that we can go away with thinking good about, feeling good about this whole session, and say the Star Trek view of the world, how to create that opportunity out there? And then let's find ways to deliver it.
I think we're at a dangerous time now, because there are so many people who believe they have the grand solution, and some of them are very noisy. They might not be right, and there's a risk that, you know, in backing the grand solution, we cause another grand catastrophe. So I think right now this is the time for us all to get much more humble, much more open, much more Buddhist in our willing to let go of everything that we knew and we thought was working, and start learning and start experimenting and start listening way more. And I think the most powerful thing we can do right now is listen, understand. So whether it's trying to work out what the community that feels most aggravated and most aggrieved by the oppression and is driving the Black Lives Matter movement, rather than telling them what they should be doing or telling them what you think the answer is, listen to what they're saying. Listen to the people who are innovating and how they're saying they might fix things. Listen to the people who currently manage those supply chains, who are telling you why your innovative solution just won't work in the world as it's structured. If we did more listening, we'd have a lot less failed startups, we'd have a lot faster innovation coming to market, and we'd create a lot more viable, sustainable, and inclusive future for all.
And Rohit, what a wonderful segue for me to talk about next session, next series that's coming out, which is called The Future of Listening. It is led by Rob Kappeler, who is a conductor, musician, author, and a commentator. He's also a professor at Stanford and New York Philharmonic Orchestra and so on. And Rob and I have spoken a lot about listening, and we're talking about the future of listening and how listening becomes an integral part of future leaderships, and you alluded to that exact sentiment. So we have a whole series throughout the summer coming out. We also have something else we are doing with called The Future of Finance, Finance 5.0, with the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, and that's being launched this week. That's another good thing that's going on. We have Emily Sidney Smith, who's one of the contributors in your book. She is coming in an exclusive CEO session next Sunday. We're doing that, and Mark Esposito. So those are some of the really high quality sessions that are happening over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And stay tuned, folks. So before we end, so thank you very much indeed, Rohit, for being candid, being authentic, being open, being human. And I think it's truly refreshing, and I'm deeply grateful to you for all of this. And I hope we can do wonderful things together. I see a lot of books behind you. I hope we'll end up publishing a book together and adding to your shelf. So thank you again. Thank you to all the participants. Now, what the final thing I can do is launch a poll, which I should have done earlier, which is, let's do a fun poll, basically, guys. Here's a fun poll. And the poll is about which one of these tactics are you planning to focus on as part of your multiple choice? And so that's the first one. Can you guys see it? Hope you can. Nobody's voting. Nobody has seen this. Can you guys not see it? No, it's coming through. Right, a few people are voting, and we do that. Any final thoughts while this vote is going on? You were the one who suggested these final questions, Rohit. What are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank everyone who's been part of the webinar and who's been sharing their thoughts, because it's there's such a rich conversation goes on in the chat that you don't see while you're talking or looking at the questions. But I love how engaged people are getting, and I think there's a vibrancy of views, really interesting differences between those who are wanting to learn and explore, those who believe they've got a solution, and those who feel innately that they've got the right solution to these things. And I think the challenge is for all of us to get a lot more humble and just accept that none of us knows. And this is a real time to learn, listen, and experiment.
Okay, sharing the results. Here we are.
I like that. So thinking that the unthinkable is the
weekly workout.
Winner. Not so much support for culture and contactless at the moment. Reimagining the business futures. Interesting. The biggest single grouper think that things can only get better. A few think they're on the road to nowhere, and a tiny number think that they just want to wait till it's all over. And we
The
should...
second question, people are saying things can only get better. Come on, folks, it's not that bad. It can get worse than this. If you look at the Spanish flu and various others, worse things have happened. And before we end, can people just, this is a webinar survey, and it'll take you about 30 seconds to do that. Just tell us what feedback for Rohit and myself. We're both public speakers. We do lots of webinars and so on. And it's always nice to get a feel from people, whether we are actually connecting, whether we are actually resonating with you. And I think that to me is a very important point. Because we can do a lot of blah blah, but is it resonating? Is it hitting? So let's see. We're getting a couple of goods and very goods, so that's not bad. Overall webinar, they wouldn't want to change anything. Last number of people, that's good. So Rohit, we did a good job.
Excellent, excellent.
So let me just end this and give it another 10 seconds or so, and we'll end and publish it, and maybe we'll get a good idea. One of my friends, Jafar, has just asked a question on the chat. Is the book available? Yes, it is. Can you tell us where he can get it?
You can get it. Let me share that beautiful picture for you. There you go. There's the book. It's available from our website, fastfuture.com. Just go to the store, and it's available from Amazon as well. And depending on where you are in the world, it may well be cheaper to buy it from Amazon because the shipping costs will be lower. We ship from the UK and US, but Amazon ships from a lot more local markets. So I don't want anyone wasting their money. Yeah, it's there. If you go to our website, you'll see all the other books that we published. And there's one that was sponsored by Aruba, and that's available for free, but it's a proper book like all the rest.
Okay, so if you can stop sharing and let me put the poll out there. We've ended the polling, and here we do. Here we share the results. 81% people feel we're very good. So well done, Rohit. So that's good. How impactful was the content in terms of providing insights and learning? Relevant and impactful were the two main ones. What would you improve in the overall webinar? Improve the content. Who said that? Obviously, there are people out there who want to improve the content, which is good.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. What do they mean by that? Without an explanation, it's hard.
Perhaps not enough content. I mean, I guess they wanted more.
Someone didn't want me. There you go.
So relevance a little bit, but content, I find that interesting. Would you recommend this webinar or similar ones to your friends and your colleagues? And the answer is 100% yes. Well, that's brilliant. Stop sharing results. Thank you very much. And there we go. So thanks to everybody who stayed on, everybody who participated in our polls. This was on Facebook Live. We will restream it this Saturday. It will be on exponentialtalks.com by this weekend. It will also be, the full session will be there, and you'll be able to see if anybody has missed out. So, and there'll be a lot of opportunities to do that. And then we'll take out some of the nuggets from this session and then sprinkle them on the various bits of social media. So thank you again, Rohit. Thank you for everybody there. And a very good evening to all of you. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you, and have a good week, everyone.
Thank you, sir. All the best.